understand the Kiwi Rail maps. So Tina, thank you. Welcome back. We're now convened again, and so we've got really a fruit salad of issues still before us just to work our way through, and thought we'd start off with talking about the maps for McNab, and also there's reference here to the Kiwi Rail map layers, and Matt also in one of his reports was dealing with one of the other zones. Was it one of the development area to the South Gore industrial area? And I'm not too sure what's new there that you wanted us to pick up on. So Tina, just in terms of using your time productively today, if we're talking about McNab and the South Gore, is there anything else we can usefully cover with you today that's in your report?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm really open to, as you said, it's about tying up loose ends, right? So there is a lot of little bits and pieces floating around. So anything you have questions on, of course, I'm open for questions on that. One thing I did change with the Appendix A for the supplementary evidence was to include all the map layers at the very end, because there's been a lot of discussion, especially about the information only layers. So I thought it could be useful for you to actually have them all listed and what's there and what's not. And I've also put in, you know, if we're recommending to add something or amend them, that there are little notes for them. So that was the intention with that. I know the information layers are very useful to provide help for plan users, but it is that, you know, decisions about what goes in the plan and what's the information on the layer has been something that's come up a few times.
Okay, I do want to have a chat after we talked about McNab, about Rule General Industrial Zone, Rule 9 and Noise S3 that I raised and you've included in your report. So just to give you a warning, coming back to that after McNab. So with McNab, we've been provided with an additional plan, and that is in response to what came from legal submissions from McNab Management Limited that said the report that we received had the wrong plan in it. So first up, where do we find the plan? Was that in the report that you did, Matt? In the supplementary report to something?
No, it's in the, I'm just looking at it now, it's on page 9
of
Appendix C, which is Appendix, yes, that looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, the outline development plan for McNab that Victoria produced, I think, is in this Appendix C. To the supplementary evidence.
Page 9.
No, that's not it.
That's the variation of it. So I'm in the hearing stream 12 wrap up.
Go to Appendix C down the bottom of
map changes.
Yep.
Sorry, no, it was Appendix C to the supplementary evidence.
Yeah, it's not Appendix C of your 42A. So it's in the supplementary evidence. So is it under Tina's?
Oh, sorry, I see what you mean. It's too many appendices C. Yes, so the McNab submission, I believe, was in response to Appendix C of the 42A report, which listed all the proposed map changes. And there was a bit of a misunderstanding about what Ms. Woodbridge had recommended. So she provided this outline development plan to try and clarify that.
Right.
Which is now in the Appendix C to the supplementary evidence.
Right, so I've got an Appendix C updated McNabb outline development plan, which shows the recommended light industrial area with some green lines around it, lime green against the highway, darker green between there and what is showing up as general rural zone, plus blue cross-hatched area and green the little cross-hatched area being the Hinga Kai area. So that's the plan you're referring to?
Has it got some
Yes.
dashed black lines
Yes.
for site access?
Yes.
Yep.
Now, first question, so, no, just for you to confirm, your recommendation at the end of all the processes we've gone through is this is the map we should be using?
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I can take this, Tina. Yeah. Yes, so that's Ms Woodbridge's final recommendation for McNabb outline development plan is this one, supplementary evidence appendix C.
Right.
Now, that may differ from the submitters, but this is Ms Woodbridge's final recommendation, and that's
Okay.
I think the clarity that was I think the memorandum of council that came in from them at the end of March was suggesting there was a mistake, but there isn't. This is the plan that she's suggesting. And this is the extent of the light industrial area that Ms Woodbridge is comfortable with, given the scope arguments.
Can I have some clarification that the original submission that was lodged showed what can be described as the transport yard, and the submission has been general rural with a rural industry precinct overlay, whereas it shows up as rural lifestyle in the final plan that you're recommending. Why did that change take place?
I'm not sure, I'm sorry. I don't know if Joel Matt had that background. We might have to defer that.
Yeah,
one.
we might
Sorry,
have to
Ms.
come back,
Woodbridge.
unfortunately, because Victoria's on leave at the moment. So.
And there are two accesses going in that we learned from Murray today should be 40 metres apart or 50 metres apart. And so it shows an access that goes up into the Mahinga Kai area. And wanting to question the sensibility of having two accesses. Because if we've got rural lifestyle, what's the minimum lot size that you're allowed in rural lifestyle? 1 hectare? Are you actually going to have 1 hectare lots? Or is the road going to go up through the Mahinga Kai area, which is unlikely, or go straight up parallel with the boundary? To me, it just raised some doubts about what that zoning is in that area.
So in terms of the access points that are shown on that plan, whilst there might be a, obviously taken into consideration transport standards and the need for them to be 40 metres apart, that sort of finer detail would be managed through consent processes, outline development plans. When there's roading accesses or access ways, they are generally indicative and concept level. So I think in terms of the finer details of standards around transport accesses and how close they are together, that's something that can be managed through the consent process. In terms of the suitability of having those two accesses in those locations based on the zoning, it appears to me from the plan that one access is purely for the development area and that industrial space, whilst a second access is providing a linkage into that rural lifestyle area. In terms of the assessment that's gone in behind those two accesses, I would imagine it's a product of the discussions of NZTA. But again, I think in order to interrogate that further, we'd have to discuss with Ms Woodbridge and potentially the McNabb submitters.
or you leave it with us because we don't really want things dragging on after tomorrow.
I appreciate that, yes.
Because the other thing is with the land that we're talking about, there's a bund most of the way across that property, and it's almost that you could have a green line, because part of the philosophy that McNabb management was promoting was that there be a landscape buffer between the what they saw as the industrial area and the lifestyle land next door, and given that there's a rural lifestyle block on the opposite side of McKinnon Road, that extending the bund all the way along had some attraction if there was only one access point going into the property. I'm kind of thinking of Ladies Mile, that you would actually have one intersection serving a large development, one access serving a large development, rather than a series of accesses. Doesn't matter what the use is. So there's probably nothing else you can help us with in terms of that plan, although I think Glenys has a comment as well. Or
I was just wondering if there was a discussion. There was a discussion about this top road here having an access into this area.
it fell off between the initial hearing and the last hearing that we had with McNabb management,
Thank you.
because they actually need the owner's consent to use it. So that's probably about as far as we can go on McNabb then. Right, no other questions. So, Tina, if we can go back please to General Industrial Zone Rule 9, and I'd like to bring it up. So, next page. I hope the same Rule 9 is what I've just pulled out of the plan is notified. Yes. So Rule 9, which is on page 557 and 558 of the plan, is for residential activity, the status is permitted, where 6 conditions are listed. So under the rule, if you don't comply with any of them, you're a non-complying activity. Is that correct?
Yes.
However, my point is this, that if you don't comply with noise S3 under this rule, you're non-compliant. But if you go to rule noise more standard S3, if you don't comply with it, it's a restricted discretionary activity.
Yes, correct. So I've discussed Victoria provided some comments for my evidence in relation to this, and it was highly intentional that a residential activity that don't comply with these things in the general industrial zone would become a non-complying activity. There are other residential activity rules within the plan that also
So why can't the non-compliance part of rule GIZ-R9 saying if you don't comply with 1, 2, 3, 4 or 6, you're non-complying. If you don't comply with noise S3, you are restricted discretionary. Go to rule noise S3.
I think the issue is that if you're a residential activity in the industrial zone, we want you to go to be a trigger to be a non-complying activity, not a restricted discretionary activity, regardless of whether you meet the noise standard or not. Because we're trying to discourage residential activities from the industrial zone.
I understand what you're saying there, but there's about 24 examples through the plan where we've got this inconsistency and that logic won't work with the other ones, or some of them. So I envisage we will need to have a look at applying that logic to the other ones where it comes up. And I only use that one as the example because I'd just been working on writing a decision on that chapter.
Yeah, I think there's another issue in terms of there's a very limited number of standards that are non-complying from memory. So you've got the opposite thing happening where you might be a restricted discretionary activity, but actually because you don't meet the standard, you're a non-complying activity. Have I got that right?
That's not so bad.
Yeah.
Because the other ones, there's some discretionary activities. You become discretionary if you don't meet the standard under the rule, but under the standards you're still restricted discretionary. So I guess what guidance do you want to give us as we go through the plan and look at that issue?
I think it comes down to a few things. One of the things is that the plan should be read as a whole. So where you've got your noise, the noise chapter is a district-wide chapter. So you might be applying noise S3, or you are applying noise S3 to different activities depending on the zone, depending on what the activity actually is. So if you are having to reconcile those instances, then I would advise that you look at the overarching activity that you're specifically trying to manage, and are there other factors at play, i.e., for instance, in this example, we have an overarching intention that residential activities are avoided in the industrial zone, and you get that from the industrial objectives and policies in terms of the direction of that zone chapter. So if you do come across others that need to be reconciled, is there actually something in the zone which gives you more of a direction in terms of whether or not it's appropriate that rule is more restrictive than a standard, also taking into account that standard will apply elsewhere in a different set of circumstances, for instance, if it's a district-wide chapter.
So, for example, if that standard applied to residential activities in the residential zone, which are permitted, then you'd rely on the standard because we don't need a consent. And so Joe's point is look at what the outcome the plan's trying to achieve. And it's particularly complicated with those citywide rules because they apply everywhere.
I might come back with some other examples in the morning that I can't reconcile. Okay, but that was helpful. Thank you, Tina. That clarified it. All right. So in terms of the what was the other one there? Was it the rail, Kiwi Rail map layers?
Oh yes. So Kiwi Rail indicated through the hearing process that they would provide us with updated maps for their designations was one of them, and they've provided that now. So for decisions, the shapefile is already there. The other one was a vibration alert layer that Ms. Woodbridge had recommended to include as an information-only layer. So they've provided the detail of that too. So that's just really for the decisions to make it easy. They've provided them.
And my understanding is that the advice that I think it was Tina in one of her reports an information layer, information cannot be used as the basis for a rule.
It's, yes, if you need to use the layer to know if you're complying or not, my recommendation would that it be a district plan layer rather than an information layer. But if it's something that's just to, like the archaeological alert layer or something like that, where you're just informing people of something to be aware of, then you can include them as information. But like, for example, the One Network framework, you need to know what road category you belong to be able to determine compliance with those transport rules. So that's why I've said I think it's appropriate as it's in the plan layers rather than as an information only layer. So that's kind of the distinction between them.
My recollection of where we got to with the heritage chapter was that we were talking about the archaeological layer, and the recommendation I recall was that it be an information layer, but I think in the latest version of the rules, or the final version that was recommended to us, it actually had a rule that related to that layer.
No, there is no rule that relates to the archaeological. There's archaeological sites in the plan, but there's the archaeological alert layer sits outside it. There's a note in the earthworks chapter, for example, that mentions it, but there is no rules that relate to the archaeologist layer.
So what's an earthworks that refers to the archaeological layer?
A note, a chapter note.
So is it triggered by a matter of discretion or something? Like, or is it
No,
just
it's just
purely an
a note
information layer?
that mentions that there is an archaeological alert layer where there are known human activity before, was it before 1900, isn't it? Yeah. So it's just, it's a highly, well, it's more likely that you might have an accidental discovery in one of those areas. So it's just, if you're going to do earthworks, you just need to be aware of it.
Just give me a moment. So I just want to bring up the earthworks one, because when I saw something I put an orange sticker on it.
It's in note 4. I've got it up on my screen if you want me to share.
Yes, please.
Can you see that?
Can you zoom it up?
So that's triggering something outside the plan. Is that right, Tina?
Well, it's not really triggering anything. It's just letting people know that there could be a higher chance that you might
So its primary job is linked to the accidental discovery protocol.
Yes.
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 Okay. All right, thank you for that. It actually generated that there's reference to a Mana Whenua chapter provision that I'd missed earlier as well. Okay. Is there anything else that we can usefully do this afternoon?
Yes, please. Your Appendix B to your supplementary, I want to thank you for your attention to those questions from right at the start of the hearing. I found your table very useful. There's one bit that I thought we could check in about, and that's my questions around critical infrastructure.
Sorry, just so this is Appendix B to the supplementary report?
Correct, and it's the leftover minute 9 questions. Yep. And so I'm on
No,
page
it's a
2
supplementary report.
of that, and it's the interpretation section.
Sorry,
and
just catching up. So it's in the hearing 12.
hearing 12, supplementary, Appendix B, page 2.
Wait a minute, sorry.
Here it is.
What?
Magic. So
It's up on the screen.
it is up on the screen, and right down the bottom of my questions in that area, I've got, are radio communications missing from the list? So I'm happy that everything else is sort of covered off, but for me that one was still hanging. And so what I wanted to note was that it seemed to me that the radio communications could also fall within the RPS definition of RSI. They're part of the wider definition of infrastructure, as well as being a network utility in the RMA definition, and in the notified PDP definition of a network utility. So it seemed to me that they might be missing. So in the network utility definition in the notified PDP, it sits next to telecommunications. And I just wonder if we could incorporate it in critical infrastructure.
I could definitely have a look at it. I might need to have a quick chat to Mishka about it, but could it be that radio communication is part of what's defined under the Telecommunications Act, possibly?
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's always spoken of separately in where it pops up, you know, in the network utility definition. It's differentiated, but maybe you're right.
So what's the one that you're querying? Whether
Radio communications is
radio
missing.
communications I thought was part of telecommunications described in the Act.
I mean, that's what we had considered it as being included as under.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so it should be included, and our advice is that it is under that section of that definition.
Right. Okay. And I'd missed that. Is there any reason not to sort of make it more visible? Yeah.
No, there's no reason why we couldn't make it more visible. I think
Infrastructure definitions are very confusing in terms of how many different acts you have to, in places you have to go to unpack them. So it might be helpful.
I think the difficulty with that is then you might need a definition of radio communications. Just
there is an act that has a definition in it. I've looked it up before.
Alright.
Yeah, I think I'd have to see which one it is, but there's definitely an act that has a definition of radio communications.
So telecommunication under the Act means conveyance of electromagnetic means from one device to another of any encrypted or non-encrypted sign, signal, impulse, writing, image, sound, instruction, information or intelligence of any nature, whether for the information of the person
Signal.
using the device or not. So yes, it's included. And radio, they only have radio frequency in that Act.
Okay then. Bring on the MPS for infrastructure with a definition. Okay. So at paragraph 150 of the, which one is it? I think it's the main section 42A for this wrap-up hearing. And you are talking about, and it's at page 49 of your section 42A, the allowance for lawfully established crossings and bridges as they relate to the stream and river setback standard. I just wanted to check if the plan doesn't specifically allow for lawfully established crossings and bridges, what is the effect of that? I'm trying to work out what its presence is doing. So I would say if it's lawfully established, section 10 has its place. So then I wanted to check if the intention is to allow for future consented lawfully established crossings and bridges. Is that what you had in mind? So we're not talking about things that exist now, but things that might become lawfully established once the plan is operative.
sorry, can you just give us the page reference again?
So it's paragraph 150, page 49.
So this came from hearing streams 3 when it was discussed about the stream setback in the rural zones, and there was a discussion about allowing for lawfully established crossing and bridges. Joe, you might need to jump in and correct me, but I think it was to avoid duplication with the regional council. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. So it was specifically for lower order streams only, and it was to avoid that duplication with the regional council.
And therefore, it would capture anything that was newly consented under that regional.
Yes, that's
Plan.
correct. Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay, that's great. Thanks for refreshing me. I knew it was. Yeah, it was a long time ago. Yeah. And actually, that's an important reminder that lawfully established can have that function of, without reference to the regional plan, achieving that. That's actually quite useful for something else I've been thinking about, so thank you. And my very last questions are the ones around your paragraph 215, where you're responding to the minute that had some further questions to bring in assessment of the forestry report. And that goes all the way back to our minute 16.
Do you mean the supplementary evidence or the...
No, no, you're right.
Page 60.
Hang on a minute. I've got para 215 in the section 42A. So,
Yeah, that's the.
oh yes, it is.
A bit above.
Yeah, so it's paragraph 214 of the main section 42A at page 60. So yeah, 214, not 215. Oh, and actually probably a bit higher up.
Starts at 204.
Section
Two-
9.
Oh, right. Yeah, so wrote that down badly. I think I meant 205. Anyway, whatever. So here we are. So I just wanted to check. Obviously, one of the main thrusts of minute 16 was differentiating between plantation forestry and its effects and exotic continuous cover forestry and its effects. What I wasn't clear of once I'd read through this bit here was whether you saw support in that report for differentiating between plantation versus exotic continuous cover, because I can see you've done a lovely analysis of plantation forestry, and can you illuminate a little bit further any differences that come through the report about those two different forestry types?
I have to go to Joe on this one.
Yeah,
But,
that's
yeah.
fine. Yeah, I can take this one. So the report from Great South, I think, from reading that report, bundled in plantation forestry and exotic continuous cover as the same thing under the umbrella term carbon forestry. My understanding is that their arguments for doing that is that whilst plantation forestry does plant and then harvest, the way that the carbon credit system is set up is that you must then replant in order to not have to pay the credits back. So whilst it's plantation forestry because it's a harvest, they still consider it carbon forestry because it's a repetitive process, and there's always going to be trees growing on the land in order to retain the carbon. Whereas exotic continuous cover forestry is just plant and walk away. So my thought process based on the other national policy direction that we have is that we have the MPS for highly productive land, which talks about productive use and enables and encourages productive forestry, in which case plantation forestry, in my mind, cannot be managed in such a way that it would not be in line with that MPS HPL unless we had really specific data to go through that process of the 32. But in my opinion, the exotic continuous cover forestry, because it doesn't have that harvesting step, it's not a productive use. So it can be
That's
easily carved out of
what
the
I was looking
HPL.
for. Thank you. And so I wasn't clear if that was coming through the report at all, but you've been clear that the report bundles, which I thought.
I think it does,
think
yeah.
it yeah. But the point that you've just made is the key point of minute 16. So that's what I wanted to check. So I think we're on the same page that we might be able to think of exotic continuous cover forestry as not a productive use of highly productive land. That's an available option for us. Yeah. So, and I think there was another question in the last minute that was around the percentage of highly productive land, knowing that that's signalled to change, but at the point of our decision, we have to think about the law at the point of our decision, which includes LUC 1, 2 and 3 at the moment. Do we have some solid data on the percentage of LUC 1, 2 and 3 land in the Gore district?
Yeah, I think we do have that statistic somewhere. I just don't have the actual specificity off the top of my head. However, I do know that it is the majority of the Gore district is 1, 2 or 3.
And that is our understanding, and,
Yeah.
and that's the reason and rationale behind minute 16. But what we've realised is that we have this understanding, and we've certainly talked about it in the hearing, but what we're missing is the data point that backs up everybody's understanding. So we really, I think, need that data point, because that's the key lever inside minute 16. First, that conversation we just had, that exotic continuous cover forestry is different to plantation forestry, and is a less, or you could even say probably much less productive use of highly productive land. And that matters in the Gore district. So the point that comes through, thank you, in the response here, is that the case law is very focused on what is different in your district. That would mean that you would do something different than the base NESCF. And our understanding as a panel is that this is a pretty big difference, that the majority of the Gore district would fall into the category of highly productive land, and therefore leaving the door open for a lot of exotic continuous cover forestry has some pretty, potentially some big implications for this district. You know, otherwise we may not have, you know, we wouldn't necessarily have gone down the road of questions that we did through that minute. So I guess if you could dredge that data up, I think that would be a really important mop-up point for us.
Can I just clarify, do you want, because I've been doing work in Marlborough, for example, and they have a high proportion of highly productive land as well. So do you want just the Gore figure, or do you want how it compares to other districts?
That would be quite nice if you do have that. Yes, please.
See what we can find.
See how you go.
Given you have 48 hours.
Yep. Oh, I think it's...
So it's a matter of if it's sitting there, fine, give it to us. I believe that's as far as we can go today, and the timing's good because two of us are due at another meeting upstairs very soon. So we will adjourn till 9 o'clock tomorrow, is it? There's a little bit that needs to be done overnight, so we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
I may struggle to do much more. We've got meetings through till 8 o'clock.
We'll be